It all started on a quiet Saturday morning in our suburban neighborhood, one of those places where the grass is always trimmed. Everyone waves politely, and the HOA thinks it runs the world. My wife had just come home from an overnight FBI operation. Still in full uniform, badge clipped, and gear visible, she was exhausted but proud. She's one of the most dedicated agents I've ever known, disciplined, calm, and always focused on the mission. But none of that mattered to Karen, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog who thinks every driveway and mailbox is her personal business. We were standing outside chatting, me holding her coffee, when Karen stormed over like she'd just spotted a national emergency. With hands on hips and that signature tight-lipped glare, she demanded to know why someone was parading around in a fake FBI costume. My wife, confused at first, calmly explained she was on duty and lived here, but Karen wasn't having it. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and called 911 right there on the sidewalk, reporting a suspicious woman dressed in cosplay pretending to be an FBI agent. That's when things got real. As we stood there, stunned, you could hear the operator on speaker asking for details. Karen, totally convinced she was saving the neighborhood, described my wife's standard issue jacket and badge like it was some Halloween getup. My wife didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. But I saw that look in her eyes, the one she gives when she's about to flip the script without saying a word. And just when Karen thought she had things under control, sirens echoed in the distance, and not for who she expected. That moment changed everything. But trust me, what happened next? You won't believe how fast the tables turned. As the sirens got closer, Karen's expression shifted from smug confidence to nervous confusion. She kept glancing between us and the street, clearly expecting backup to arrive and arrest my wife for some made-up offense. What she didn't realize was that the arriving patrol cars were already briefed because my wife had checked in with dispatch earlier that morning. She was still technically on duty, wrapping up surveillance paperwork before officially clocking out. Now, to give you some background, Karen isn't just a nosy neighbor. She's the kind of person who reports a car parked an inch over the sidewalk line. Last Halloween, she called the HOA over a pumpkin that was too scary for kids. So when she saw my wife in full FBI gear, her brain didn't register federal agent. It registered rule breaker. And if there's one thing Karen lives for, it's enforcing rules she doesn't actually understand. My wife, Agent Thompson, joined the Bureau nearly 10 years ago. She's seen a lot of fraud cases, undercover ops, even a few high-stakes standoffs. But dealing with an HOA Karen in our own front yard? That was a first. Still, she kept her cool. No badge flashing, no shouting. Just calm, collected silence while Karen rambled on to 911 about impersonation, costumes, and some possible identity fraud. Meanwhile, I was standing there thinking, this is actually happening right now. The patrol car finally pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, clearly aware of who my wife was. But Karen, still in her fantasy world, rushed over to meet them like a hero, waiting for a medal. She pointed back at us, loudly insisting they do something before it gets dangerous. The officers exchanged a look, then turned toward my wife, and that's when everything started to shift, fast. But Karen had no clue just how far she'd overstepped. One of the officers, Officer Ramirez, nodded at my wife with quiet recognition. They'd worked together before during a joint task force briefing, which Karen obviously didn't know. Still holding on to her fantasy, Karen started waving her arms and talking faster, throwing out words like fraudulent badge and fake ID. She pointed at my wife's firearm like she'd uncovered some grand criminal plot. The officers stayed calm, but you could see it on their faces. They were trying not to laugh, and also trying not to escalate things too quickly. This was still a neighborhood call. Technically, the tension in the air was heavy, but no one raised their voice. That made it worse, in a way like the silence before a thunderstorm. I could tell my wife was trying to give Karen every opportunity to back down with dignity. But Karen just wouldn't stop. She even started filming with her phone, narrating the scene like she was on some true crime podcast. "This woman is impersonating a federal agent," she said, voice shaky but dramatic. "And I'm here to make sure justice is done." Meanwhile, a few neighbors had stepped outside, pretending to water plants or take out the trash, but we all knew they were watching. One of them, Mr. Jenkins, whispered to me from his driveway, "Is she serious right now?" I just nodded. At this point, it wasn't even about the uniform, it was about power, control, and Karen needing to feel like the gatekeeper of the entire block. Officer Ramirez finally asked Karen for her statement. She launched into a wild timeline of how she knew something was off ever since we moved in. She claimed she'd seen my wife come and go at strange hours, wearing suspicious outfits, and even hinted that we might be running some operation from our home. That's when I realized this wasn't just about the FBI uniform. Karen had built an entire conspiracy in her head. And the worst part? She wasn't done talking. Karen was practically shaking with conviction now. Convinced she was about to expose some undercover criminal ring in the middle of our quiet cul-de-sac. She held her phone out like it was evidence, zooming in on my wife's badge and muttering things like, "This will all be on record." But what she didn't know, what she never even thought to consider, was that everything she was saying, every wild accusation, was being taken down by the officers' body cams and already raising red flags back at their station. Officer Ramirez politely asked my wife to confirm her identity. Without saying a word, she calmly reached into her jacket, pulled out her credentials, and handed them over. Ramirez barely needed to look, but Karen leaned in like she was trying to catch a flaw, whispering to the other officer, "That's just a good replica. You can order them online." It was unreal. She had fully convinced herself this was a bust in progress, and she was the star witness. I glanced at my wife. She still hadn't said much. Her training told her not to engage emotionally, not when someone like Karen was trying to bait a reaction, but I could see the way her jaw tightened. She wasn't angry, she was calculating. She knew something Karen didn't, that filing a false police report, especially about a federal officer, is a serious offense. More neighbors started to gather now, pretending it was casual, but everyone could feel the shift in energy. Some were whispering, some recording quietly. And then came the moment that pushed it all to the edge. Karen walked right up to my wife, pointed a finger inches from her face, and said, "You're going to prison for impersonating a federal agent." No one moved, okay? Not even the officers. The air went dead silent, and that's when my wife finally spoke. My wife's voice was calm, steady, barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than anything said so far. She looked Karen directly in the eye and said, "You just made a very serious mistake." That sentence alone was enough to make a few neighbors step back. Even the officers shifted slightly. Now watching Karen more closely than before, Karen hesitated for the first time, but only for a second. She doubled down, saying she was just doing her duty as a law-abiding citizen, still holding her phone up like a shield. That's when my wife reached into her inner jacket pocket and pulled out her secondary idea higher-level clearance badge that only certain agents carry. She held it up slowly, letting the officers examine it carefully. Ramirez's eyes widened just slightly, and he gave a subtle nod to his partner. Something had just clicked between them. Karen didn't recognize the badge. To her, it looked like more costume props, and she actually laughed. "Nice try," she said, waving it off. "You think I'm going to fall for another fake?" But the officers didn't laugh. They asked Karen to step aside so they could speak with my wife in private. Karen refused. She claimed the street was public property and she had the right to monitor any illegal activity. loudly insisting that my wife was about to be arrested. And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, another vehicle pulled up. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows rolled in and parked beside the patrol cars. Two men in suits stepped out, one flashing a badge that made even Ramirez stand up straighter. Karen froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. One of the agents looked directly at her and asked, "Is this the civilian who made?" The report, you could feel the mood shift instantly. What had started as a ridiculous HOA complaint was now a situation involving federal agents, and Karen was right in the center of it. But what she didn't know yet was that this wasn't just an ordinary visit. Something much bigger was in motion. Karen stood frozen, her confidence draining as the two federal agents stepped closer. The taller one, Agent Green, confirmed my wife's credentials with a respectful nod. "Agent Thompson, we've been briefed on your status. Apologies for the disturbance." Karen blinked rapidly, still trying to process what was happening. "Wait," she stammered. "You're saying she's actually FBI?" The silence that followed was louder than any siren. Then came the moment Karen hadn't prepared for. Officer Ramirez turned to her and said, "Ma'am, you need to understand that falsely reporting a federal agent as an impersonator is a serious matter. We'll need a full statement from you under oath." Karen's face turned pale. She started backing away, mumbling about being misunderstood and just trying to help the community. But the damage was done. As the crowd of neighbors watched, whispers started spreading. People who once tolerated Karen's antics were now realizing just how far she'd gone. That's when Agent Green added, "And for the record, there's also an ongoing investigation into harassment claims in this HOA. Your name came up multiple times." Karen's jaw dropped. "What?" she gasped, looking around like someone was going to back her up. But no one did. Even Mr. Jenkins quietly turned away. My wife gave one last look at Karen. Not with anger, but with that same calm resolve she always carries. "Next time," she said gently, "maybe don't assume the worst about people." It felt like the story had come to an end. But just as the agents were leaving, one of them pulled my wife aside. He handed her a sealed envelope and said, "This wasn't just about a false call. We've had an eye on this neighborhood for a while. You might want to read this carefully." And just like that, the whole situation took a turn none of us saw coming. The uniform, the call. The Karen dramate was just the beginning of something much deeper. Later that evening, after the crowd had faded and the patrol cars were gone, we sat quietly in our living room. My wife opened the envelope the agent had handed her. Inside was a formal letter detailing an internal investigation into complaints of HOA overreach, harassment, and misuse of authority in several communities, including ours. Turns out, Karen had already been flagged in a few anonymous reports sent to a federal tip line. Not just for her behavior toward us, but other neighbors too. The call she made today only pushed her further into the spotlight. Over the next few weeks, things in the neighborhood started to shift. Karen stepped down from the HOA board, though no official announcement was made. Word spread quickly. Some neighbors quietly thanked my wife for how she handled things. Others admitted they'd felt pressured to stay silent for too long. It was strange how fast the mood of the community changed after just one moment of truth. We didn't ask for any of this. We just wanted to live peacefully, like everyone else. But sometimes people make assumptions based on nothing more than appearances. My wife's FBI uniform wasn't cosplayed to represent years of dedication, sacrifice, and service. And yet, one neighbor's ignorance turned it into a spectacle. If there's a takeaway from all this, it's this: respect matters. So does listening before judging. And when someone tells you who they are, especially while wearing a badge, probably best to believe them. Karen taught us that paranoia mixed with power can be a dangerous combination. But she also reminded the neighborhood that quiet strength, truth, and professionalism always win in the end. So Yakarin called 911 over a uniform. She just didn't realize who she was really dealing with, and that made all the difference.